Why doesn't communism work well in practice? It seems like such a great idea on paper. The biggest problem is that someone has to be in charge to oversee things and make sure things are distributed properly. And also what properly means. People being people. Those who get to power are the type who want to be in power, and often rig the system for the gain of themselves and those they care about. So you get some built-in corruption. Of course, there is grift everywhere, but in a system where those on top closely manage distribution of resources, it's going to be worse. There are also problems of incentives to do beyond the bare minimum for people. Or rather, the lack of those incentives. It's why socialist, communist policies can work on small-scale communities where you need little innovation and know and care about your neighbors, but don't work as well on larger-scale things like countries. You need leaders that are benevolent and hyper-aware and intelligent, but also logical and caring. So basically no human can apply. Any human who does should be held in extreme suspicion. There are many successful small-scale communes throughout the world. The problems occur when you scale up to whole countries, where it is much more likely to evade accountability and promote corruption. Everything wrong with the world can be summed up in just 3 words: people are assholes. Most of the answers here seem to be coming from an outside perspective. And a look at a sub like R, Anarchy 101 would help to dispel a lot of the concerns raised here. I'll offer the perspective of someone who ideologically aligns with communists. Let's start with the definition of communism. A stateless, and without other power structures, moneyless society where private property doesn't exist. Important note: personal property and private property are different concepts, and society as a whole helps each other to meet their needs. From this, first consider that none of the historical regimes that called themselves communist ever met all the requirements, especially not the abolishment of the state. The stateless aspect is the most limiting factor, especially considering that a communist society doesn't appear out of thin air, but is a society that would formerly have most likely been capitalist. The lack of overarching control that is required to meet the definition makes it so that such a society can only work if everyone in the society fully agrees on the rules of the game. On a small scale, this often doesn't pose any problems, but it makes it nearly impossible to implement in larger societies. Trying to take away that problem by installing an overarching power structure is a bad idea. Firstly, because it defeats the point of seeking a society without power structures. But secondly, the historical precedent of people who claim such an authority is necessary isn't quite a good one, is it? The same reason capitalism sours greed and the need to be better than other people. In other words, human nature exerts itself everywhere. Because in order to thrive in a communist state, we would need the majority of people to be on the same page and still actively contribute to society in such a way that most benefits the system, rather than themselves. And people tend to mostly want to benefit themselves. Plus there would be a shit ton of folks who would intentionally try to make society fail and then blame it on the system rather than their collective efforts or lack thereof. It doesn't scale well because people buy in to varying degrees. We may be born equal, but not everyone will put out equal effort or believe in central causes equally. Wanna see communism work? Start a commune of like-minded individuals and cap it at 100. It depends on what you mean by communism. It's meant different things to different people. Most people refer to the USSR, China and the like. Most definitions of communism approximate a classless, stateless, moneyless society in which the economy is collectively, communally owned. Maybe you can see the issue already. No communist state meets or has met that definition. Or even most of it. USSR had a very strong state. Had money. Had classes. The party and everyone else. And the average person had no control over the economy, so it wasn't communally owned. China has money, a state, classes, and the majority of the economy is privately owned. It's literally a capitalist country. Although not free market. Even these countries don't call themselves communist. They call themselves socialist republics, which is also problematic because they're not socialist and not republics. If you're asking why those countries have been disasters, then that's more a question of why highly centralized governments and economies are problematic, not why communism doesn't work. Historical examples of communistic societies would be the CNT and revolutionary Catalonia, which had many successes but was crushed by fascist and Soviet forces. The Ukraine Free Territory, also crushed by the USSR. Modern-day Rojava, and modern-day Zapatistas. These experiments are far more successful and, I would argue, show that communism is functional. It ignores human behavior. I don't get how proponents continue to miss the elephant in the room. So many people are shit. When you add the disincentive of having to share your shit with shit people, even good people become shit because it's not worth the effort. Karl Marx noticed communism working in farming communities, monasteries, and in hunting and gathering groups. What he didn't realize though is that type of communal living only works in small groups that are fairly isolated. When you have a population all with different needs, abilities and personalities, things just don't work. People see others having more, and they want that too. There are also lots of jobs that need to be done that are pretty unpleasant. And people need incentives to work them. Most of the early communists that we think of as successful didn't promote communism so much but capitalism and socialism together. So many things work only on paper. But time and time again communism becomes about extreme deprivation and corruption where it's not the individual that matters. Except the class system is stronger than ever. But the system. Basically you become a total cog. And your ability to support yourself and family outside of gov dictate is outlawed so that you either end up in some sort of labor camp or starving and hunting bugs to eat. And all the while you've got to pretend everything is groovy lest you be sold out by a neighbor or spouse. Think of it as the most abusive relationship you could be in. But it's your whole country and from the time of birth. This is what's happening right now to the poor North Koreans. And has been the case anywhere else communism takes hold. Truly horrible stuff. Read Animal Farm. Seems like such a great idea on paper. Does it really? The basis of communism is the abolition of classes, communal wealth, and private property, communal means of productions. It doesn't matter if you go with a communist central government or a socialist cooperativism. In the end there's always a class above in terms of power, and the corruption it carries, which is unavoidable if you want a society. Representation and central organization is key for big developments but still an issue. Hey, life is not perfect. In the end even the good dictator thought experiment gives better results. And that one is awful even when it works. Which is not that far from the truth either, as most people don't really want communism and for it work, at least on an institutional level, you would likely need the iron hand of a dictator anyway. Some people say, stateless, but it is impossible to organize something at a state level without a state. Even if you go for the cooperative as mentioned before, you still get a representative organization. Some remark the difference between private property, like means of production, and I believe land was the other, versus personal property, anything you use for yourself, like a toothbrush. Not even sure a house qualifies, nor a car. and moneyless society, but the thing is, money is just a token of value. So without it you just get back to bartering. If you eliminate bartering and redistribute instead, then you are just confirming the incompatibilities with a stateless society as well as the issues that arise from meritocracy. I forgot the name. IIT was need basis. Not worth basis, but still. Even if we don't take power into account, the fact remains that everyone's need are not equal. Would a single dude unambitious, only wants to read and live frugally, be the same that be a 2 meters tall guy with 3 kids and a disabled wife? Let's say we go for a meritocracy then. On a need basis, then what about what people want? And I am not talking just about things like, I want this console. Quote, which is okay and could technically be done. But, I want to travel. Or, I want to stop working and use the money I have to spend more time with my family instead. Or, I want to work on this instead. Which brings me to the next issue. The next issue is about rewards and individuality. The rewards one is pretty simple. And the most common allegory would be the professor averaging the grades of the students. The bad ones upwards and the good ones downwards, which end up lowering the average even more as bad students don't have to put any effort. Let the top carry us. And the top students get discouraged as they get weighted down. Of course, this is an example of economy and not what would happen in educatin per se. But it illustrates quite well the issue with lack of rewards. Even slaves in a big chunk of history received salaries, the chance to buy their freedom. But in this example, the common good is not only priority but the only thing you have. So what if you want something beyond what everyone else has? Because if there is no reward for you, you are probably not gonna do it, and even if you wanted to, you can't do something by yourself on a really big scale. Even obviating the fact that someone has to decide, and not you, if that will be done or not. Even in the most society before individual times and regions on Earth, you could not expect humans to have zero ambitions and everyone to be equal. Is a moronic concept unless you want them to survive instead of living. When it comes to individualism, it is closely related. Do you seriously believe that in a society that only pulls towards the community as a whole, you would be able to work in whatever you want? Right now you are limited by resources and the job market, but you still have the chance. While in communism you would have at best a list on which to choose from. Pre-selected list. International commerce, a key aspect for prosperity, more than proven with history, is also trickier. TL. Doctor. You would not eliminate corruption nor power classes. You would have to deal with the injustices of equality, needs and wants. Individualism and motivation plummets even in the best case scenario, and people become closer to slavery than we are today. Ironically, there is nothing wrong with wanting a good quality of life, but I sincerely believe the communist approach is comically idealistic and shallow. The issue is not equality, for example. Who cares if the other person has more than you? Their ceiling? What matters is what you have. Your base, floor. Especially since equality when the country is poor is just poverty. Abuse does matter, but that is why the best system we have now is a well implemented. That part is tricky too. Welfare state. You have all the benefits of capitalism. You regulate for its flaws. And you cover the holes with welfare. WHCIH. BTW. Also aids capitalism, as a wealthier population is more likely to progress and need less welfare. More likely to spend, to invest, etc. etc. A welfare state that balances the social net with economic growth keeps itself in check, which is always better than any kind of power concentrated on only one side where there's no one to keep the bad stuff at bay, as everyone is decided unilaterally. Even though is communal. Still, I am far from an expert, so I am open to discussion obviously. As a final note, I want to make clear that no system is perfect. I personally believe that in modern times a welfare state offers the best tools for the best outcome. But even a welfare state is difficult to achieve if the country is in shambles economically or politically. Case on which you need to prioritize economic growth. After all, there's a point on which every person saved implies two more doomed. I also want to point out that it works best in our case. But it is not universally so. If you go back in terms of development, literally or intentionally, if you eliminate the need or tools for actual big-scale organizations and only remain as more filial, small communities intertwined with each other in a communal network of pseudo-commerce. Hey neighbor, I don't have enough salt but excess sugar. Want a trade? So, bartering without profit, and everyone is content with a very simple life and accept that as the peak of humanity. That works. Research could still be done, especially more utilitarian one like in health. But a lot of stuff just would not happen as someone would decide is not worth to divert resources into that. So if what you want is that, which by the way can still be done in a capitalistic society, then for sure. As long as there's no disagreements or correlations in need from one village to another, then it works. I also want to point out that although not every issue is inherent only to capitalism, it does has drawbacks if left unchecked. Two of the worst examples of abuse are monopolies, lobbyism, bad faith, big business sinking small ones on purpose, and exploitation. Most of that can be solved through regulations, but not at 100%. Regardless of the economic problems, no free press, and no checks and balances within the government will always lead to insane amounts of corruption. A communist government is full of people. All people are imperfect. Normally that is fine. However, in a communist government there is no mechanism to restrain the imperfections of those in power. There is no fourth estate to expose their hidden secrets and lies. There are no opponent political parties to provide an alternative to corruption and problems in the main political party. Let's say, for the sake of argument, that communism is a great system from a purely economic perspective. Even so, it would always turn out to be utter dogshit in practice because of the two reasons I listed above. The human brain is literally evolved to fight against it. The brain releases dopamine when one receives a reward for a task completed. When one stops receiving rewards, one loses motivation. In order for a society to be stable, people have to receive the rewards for their labors. You can tax it, which is why socialist democracies are stable. But the heavier the tax burden, the less you'll be able to extract, and slows productivity and innovation. There is a level of taxation where on average incremental increases in rewards are sufficient to encourage additional labors. Exceed it and you fall into the communist spiral. That is the fundamental issue of communism. People get depressed and give up. I guess with enough amphetamines and cocaine you might be able to make it work. From a more practical sense, every time you create a class of rulers you end up with abusers. Edit. Apparently people are really missing the point. Motivations are different between people, but altruism without volition is just another way of saying slavery. Money is a convenient mechanism for providing a universal means of exchanging items and labors for what people need or want. Socialism can exist with choice. Communism can't. You could say egoism, but it's just very naive to think that everyone will work the same to receive the same share. Slackers and wrongdoers are everywhere, and that completely ruins the very basics of communism. If I am working 150%, you are working 90%, and he is working 60%. Why is it a great idea that the three of us gets the same share? Edit. Naive to think that. A lot of people are viewing communism from a purely capitalist viewpoint. It's true that people wouldn't be motivated to put in the work to become brain surgeons if they got paid the same as delivery drivers. But a delivery driver working 60 hours a week who still can't feed their family isn't going to be motivated either. There are intermediate versions of socialism around the world that seem to give their people a better quality of life. However, capitalist societies are resistant to those measures because they have been brainwashed into believing that success is just about hard work and choices while never acknowledging the role that opportunity has. Incentive to excel. For one example, if every lawyer gets paid the same amount, regardless of if they're good at their job or not, then there's no incentive for them to try their hardest. All the extra effort and hard work will still only pay the same as the lawyer doing just enough to get by. It doesn't work in practice because of purposeful attempts to sabotage it. Communism can't work if capitalism exists at the same time. People need to realize that communism is like how capitalism is to feudalism, and feudalism is to slavery. Communists believe that communism can only exist after the stage before it exists, which is socialism. Socialism will transition to communism. And perhaps there's even a system behind communism that is more effective. Socialist countries are sanctioned to hell and back, unable to trade with the rest of the world, are militarily threatened after being bombed and had genocide committed against them to hell and back. A lot of people answering this question don't know anything about communism nor have done the research, only parroting the capitalist class propaganda against a system that is not perfect, but a better alternative than what we have. A lot of anti-communism is what historians call determinism, where it's fated that communism will never work, that it's human nature to be capitalist. When during slavery it was human nature to own slaves and rely on slaves. During the kingdoms it was fated that kings rule over the serfs, as they were chosen by God. Now we're in an era where slavery is disappearing and where the kings are no longer chosen by God. Why is capitalism fated? Why are humans determined to be greedy?
If you enjoyed this video, please check out our playlists full of similar content. TooAfraidToAsk is like doom scrolling for your ears. Please like, share, and subscribe.